black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
It's one of the greatest rights afforded to us as Americans, the right to vote. It's the foundation of any democracy, which is a type of government for the people, by the people. Generally speaking, the laws surrounding who can vote in the U.S. are pretty straightforward. You must be a citizen of the United States, you must be a resident of a U.S. state or Washington, D.C., and you must be 18 years or older. But voting in the U.S. didn't always look this way. When it came into effect in 1789, the Constitution of the United States granted states the power to set their own voting requirements. And generally, states limited this right to white men who own property, accounting for only 6% of the U.S. population at the time. So much for a representative democracy. Gradually during the early 1800s, as new U.S. territories and states formed in the West, the right to vote was expanded to include all white men aged 21 and older in most states. As a result, the voter turnout soared during the 1830s, reaching approximately 80% of the adult white male population in the 1840 presidential election. Following the end of the Civil War, states ratified the 14th Amendment in 1868, which granted citizenship to all people born or naturalized in the United States. That meant that all former slaves were now citizens of the U.S., but this didn't grant them the right to vote. In 1870, with the ratification of the 15th Amendment, federal and state governments could no longer deny a citizen the right to vote based on race. On paper, it looked like suffrage, or the right to vote, had been extended to all men. But in practice, African Americans would have to fight nearly 100 more years for these rights to be realized in southern states.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson, and for those of you who are new to the show, the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show whose purpose is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent and our history in this country. A lot of times the media gets things wrong, but they also tend to get things wrong deliberately. And on the Umoja Circle, I believe that only through dialogue can there be a shift in consciousness. And when there's a shift in consciousness, there's a shift in your world view. Today's discussion, being that we're in the year 2024 and we're having a upcoming election, a very important presidential election, I think that is up to us as people of African descent to really get involved with. I know there's many of you out there who think that why even vote, or what's the purpose of doing that thing? We don't get anything. I'm here to let you know a point that you might not be understanding when you say things like that. I want to start off by saying, first of all, as per the Umoja Circle, I use history to understand the present. And that's how I'm going to talk about the discussion about voting and why we need to vote and why our interest in this political system is important. I'm not saying that, all the other things that we need to do as Black people in America economically and socially are not important too. There are many tools in the tool belt, and voting is just one of the tools that we need. And being complacent is a slap in the face to those who came before us. I'm always trying to make people understand that the past is located right here in the present too. The soil of the present, the things that come out that you're facing today in the present moment grew out of the soil that was placed there by our ancestors in the past. and we have to honor them in everything they did. And I'll try to show you and try to give you another perspective and why voting is important. Now, I want to quote a gentleman you might have heard of, Winston Churchill, who talked about this democratic system that we're in. I know it's imperfect, and I know this system started out enslaving us, and I'll get to that as we go on in the show. But he said this thing that you must understand, that I remember reading years ago. He said that democracies are a terrible form of government. But compared to all the other types of government you find in the world, right now it's the best thing going. This is what we got. And we have to understand how to function in it while we try to make the various changes that it's beneficial to our interests as people of African descent. Okay, that's what Brother Malcolm X was talking about in the book, in his speech, the Ballot or the Bullet. People will kind of misinterpret that. He's saying vote, but you got to vote as a collective. Okay, don't let perfection be enemy of the good. And what I mean by that, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. That you got to find the good in all complex systems. Okay. And don't look for the perfect thing that fits you as an individual. You got to look at the perfect thing that fits us as a collective, as a people. That's why we vote. That's why our ancestors understood and fought to participate in this system. The system, yes, that once enslaved them. But, okay, all the benefits that you think you have today, wearing the Versace's, or you being models and influencers, and you see our basketball players, riding jets, planes, and all these things, didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened because black folks sacrificed, okay, and fought a system that was not meant for them, so you could benefit from it the best way you can. And if you become complacent, my brothers and sisters, within a generation, within your lifetime, all that could be gone. And we'll talk about this as we go on. Okay, what I want you to understand is the past is never dead, because the present is always, like I said, rooted in the past. And as a black man, I feel that I have a personal obligation and a social responsibility to my forebears and your forebears to express my thoughts on what it means to be black in America. And I honor what happened before. Because, again, on the Umoja Circle, if you have been part of this show, you will understand that I always talk about the past to put a light on the future. And also, I want you to understand this democracy that we're in, as bad as it is not destiny, okay? It is something that we have to fight, protect, and preserve every single day. And if you become complacent, like saying you're not going to vote, okay. Anybody who's complaining about the Supreme Court today, or they're complaining about what happened when women's rights were stripped a couple of years ago by that same Supreme Court, well, if you didn't vote in the 2016 elections and you were complacent, like I'm hearing some people are saying today, and Clinton had won with your vote, we wouldn't have had these problems. We wouldn't have had women wouldn't have lost their rights. We wouldn't have had the Voting Rights Act stripped of its powers, which was controlling these states that were once part of Confederacy. And that's why we had the Voting Rights Act in 1965. To make sure that they had to go through a federal process before they could make changes about voting. And we did not do that, and you put in that person that became president instead of Clinton, and look at the mess that we're in today. So voting does have consequences. You should understand that, because our ancestors understand that. I got a series of images I want to show you, and we'll have this discussion along the way. I want to first start off with this comment by somebody always, like I said, in the Ballot and the Bullet, Brother Malcolm was talking about, we got to form collectives. In other words, we have to be a community that functions just like a country. He said, we cannot be like individuals. We got to vote in blocks, not individually, but for the best of the collective. It's never going to be perfect. There's going to be different interests, but you got to leave your interests at the door and see what is best for the whole not for each individual. I'm hearing too many black folks saying, financially, I'm not going to vote because financially this or the environment that. No, it's a collective. What's the best for the group? Okay, black people have always worked from that perspective, and that's how we've gotten this far in this system. Okay, the only tool in the toolbox, you got to use whatever you got. That's my point. I mean, I wish I could say it in a nice, rosier way like some politicians, but no, this is the truth of an elder. And he said these words, I, for one, believe that if you give people a thorough understanding of what confronts them and the basic causes that produce their issues, they'll create their own programs. And when the people create a program, you get actions. That's what he's saying. We have to come together again. We've been doing this before, but we got disconnected from our history. If you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. That's what that statement means. And Malcolm is saying that we have to understand what we're up against. It is a war we're fighting. Understand that point. Let's go on to the next point. And one of the programs or ideas black people in this country have taken actions to accomplish in this country since the ratification of the United States Constitution in 1789 is to fight in a political wars. That's what I'm saying. This is a war for their rights by making the Constitution's promised words work for them. Just because they're the words on a piece of paper, if you don't have somebody in there trying to make sure that those words work for his interest group, again, we're at war with other interest groups in this country. This is how the United States systems of politics was set up. It was set up as a interest group, okay? You see, the founding fathers understood, now I'll just leave that there for you to read a little bit. The founding fathers understood that there was a tendency in all human beings to mismanage power. They understood that, okay? They understood that and white America for 246 years had power. And even if there was a constitution that, quote, says all white men, basically, at first, had their rights, those who were in power want to maintain it. Their interests. Their interest is what you're going to have to deal with. We have to come up with our collective interests. That's the purpose of dealing with the politics. And if you don't understand that, and you think of a bunch of individuals trying to do their own thing, it's never going to work. Let's go on to the next one, next image here. All right. Note that our African ancestors who were kidnapped and forcefully brought to these American shores in 1619 were not brought here to be teachers, doctors, lawyers, engineers, or entrepreneurs. They were these things on the African continent, regardless of what you've been taught in schools about it being a dark continent and they being savages. They were those types of individuals. When they were kidnapped and brought here, all that was taken from them, okay? We were brought here to be a permanent working force only in America. Understand that. And if you're walking around as a doctor, a lawyer, or a model, or entrepreneur, and all these things, understand that there's a reason why you did that in this political war, because your forebears fought for it, died for it. And if you don't vote, you are slapping them in the face, and you will lose this right because there's other interests who are going to fill the vacuum where you did. Just like those who did not vote in 2016, well, those who were against anything that had to do with black interests took those positions, and they produced the laws that took away women's rights, that took away voting rights for many, gerrymandered different areas of the South, brought back certain federal Confederate ideas into the federal departments. This is what you are fighting. You got to be vigilant every day. Let's go on to the next one. I just want to give you this overview of what I'm talking about. That on the left you see 1619 red. That's enslavement. That's where we had no rights at all. Okay, you wondering, you thinking that you ain't getting nothing from this government today, that you ain't gonna vote? look what we had to deal with. And then in 1865, after the Civil War, then you had the Reconstruction period, segregation. We had to fight another 100 years, just like the lady said in the video. Okay, in 1954, this started the embryonic start of the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. 1954. Another point I want to stop there. 1954 with the Brown versus the Board of Education. You know what the enemy did in Virginia, places like that in Florida? They shut down schools rather than follow what the Supreme Court did. So black folks didn't go to school for 4 or 5 years in certain parts of the South, rather than getting that place integrated. Again, if you don't be vigilant, like in any war, the enemy will try to infiltrate and get their interests in play. And if you look all the way down to the far bottom, almost there, that's 2000 to today. Look how little bit of time that we've had this little bit of so-called freedom. And what are they trying to do again today? Ban books. You know, bring back type of segregation types of laws and rules, thinking that we are disengaged and don't think that we will don't think that many of us understand what's at stake. What's at stake is taking us back to all those yellow and areas, at least the yellow areas. Okay, bringing back segregation. That's what these white nationalists are about. They're not about your rights. And you're not going to have it because it's on a piece of paper. You got to maintain it and fight for it. And one of the tools as a citizen soldiers that you have is the right to vote, to get those out and put those who have your interests in the collective sense in those positions, and also maintain and make sure that they follow what you desire. Let's go on to this next one. Yet, you know, like I said, we never stop fighting in this political war. From America's inception, black people have been fighting. Even before, we were first expressed our right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness and freedom with our feet by running away and seeking freedom from those plantations. That was a political statement that we made, that we are human beings and we will not accept your way of saying and defining us. That's a social structure point of view. Who are we to others? They saw us as slaves, illiterate, and all that. But who are we to each other is our governance structure, how we look at each other. And we saw ourselves as no different than them, just under a system that they created to maintain, and we did everything we can to fight that system. That's a political statement. Okay, let's make sure you understand that. Let's go on. And this is a statement you must understand. If you remember anything in this show, remember this. Politics is war without bloodshed. War is just politics with bloodshed. Politics is a war. And what you do in a war, you have make sure wars are not beautiful things. Wars are messy. Lives are lost during a war, and politics was a war. And you think that I'm just making up some type of hyperbole. No. This is how the founding fathers put this thing together. They use military terms, okay? You don't believe me? Let's go on to the next one. It is a historical fact that the United States political system was created to basically function as a perpetual political war between multiple interest groups. Interest groups are like armies. Your interests. I'm going to take that hill. I'm going to cover this area. If you are not part of interest, see, James Madison, who was the so-called one of the architects of the Constitution, pretty much said so in a paper called the Federalist Paper 51, which he wrote in February of 1788. Now, if you hear all these people who think they know the Constitution and walk around talking about the Constitution, that's pretty, that's nice, but that's BS. If you want to understand what the founding fathers was, and you're not being told this, I don't hear it, but there was 83 essays that were written to explain what each section of that Constitution meant. 83, I think, 83. And they were put in various newspapers, because when they got together to form the Constitutional Convention, they were just there to fix up the Articles of Confederation, which they had before. But they saw that during the Revolution, the Articles of Confederation, another kind of confederation, they're going to have another one in the 1860s, and it's going to screw up just the way that Article of Confederation did during the Revolutionary War, and that's why they created the Constitution. But they had to explain it to everyday people in order for it to be ratified. It took about 2 years. They came together in 1787. But during that period of time, between 1787 and 1788, and during that period of time, there was a series of essays that were put in newspapers that were in the larger colonies like New York, Philadelphia, and Virginia. And one of those, at each paper, each essay was given a number based on when they came in. And this was Federalist paper number 51 to explain how the checks and balances was. How do you make sure that the will of the minority doesn't override the will of the majority? Or how the will of the majority is checked by the minority? If you want to understand how defense, that's a defensive strategy of war. How do you manipulate? Whether you go a guerrilla route or you form, you come together with people with similar interests, or you mass together. So you try to have strategies. Where's our strategy in the black community? We used to have them, but today, if you're saying you're not going to vote, that's not a great strategy in this political war, because it's still going to affect you. It's those who did not vote in 2016. If you were a woman, then you are being dealt with if you didn't vote. Because it wasn't because of Trump or the Republican Party. It's because you allowed Trump and the Republican Party into those positions where they could manipulate their interests and disregard your interests as women or black people when they took out the Voting Rights Act. Again, it's a war. Let's go on. This is the Federalist paper. This is the book that you can find today. Just Google Federalist papers and you can read all the articles. You want to know what they meant by the Second Amendment, that of nonsense you hear on video? The Federalist paper will explain it through those essays. Let's go on. Okay, this is a little bit, I'll focus a little bit more on what he was trying to say. This essay, Federalist Paper number 51, written by James Madison, explained how the checks and balances between the three branches of government worked and why interest groups came into being, which was to protect the local interests of the minority. At that time, which was the wealthier people. There was a minority of the people who were wealthy from the tyranny of the majority. One of the well-kept secrets about this thing, about checks and balances, it wasn't about, you heard about the executive branch and it checks the congressional legislative branch and the Supreme Court and all that nonsense. No, James Madison understood that human beings have their own personal interests. And we're going to form these interest groups. And it's these interest groups that are going to keep each other in check. And the more population we get, the larger the population you get, whether you're from the Northeast with your particular interests or the Midwest with your interests, Native Americans with their interests, white people with their interests, black people with their interests, we all would be fighting each other. Some of us would make alliances. Some of us would fight each other against each other. And he said that's what this checks means, so that there'll be no one majority overwhelming a minority. At that time, they were thinking about the wealthy, okay? So the more we have, that's why we have this federal system, where you have the federal government, then you have the states have their interests, and you have these local interests. So all these chopped up interests spread instead of the majority of people combining to overwhelm the government, they do things so that we going to fight each other and check each other, make sure that your interests don't overwhelm ours. And if you don't participate in this system, your interests are never going to be fulfilled. So you're wondering why you ain't voting and why things ain't working for you? But if you ain't participating in your interest group, then well, it's your fault. It's like somebody carrying a gun, which is the vote, in the middle of a battle and refusing to use it. Are you going to help your platoon or your troops, for the many of you who are military members, in a firefight, and you don't use your weapon? How would you look to your fellow individuals in your battalion of troops? Or you throw down your gun. That's what you do when you don't vote. Think about that. Let's go on. Okay, those white founding fathers like James Madison understood that there is a tendency in all human beings to mismanage power. That's their particular interest. Okay, I do things for my personal interest. That's why all politics is local. What is your local interest? You set an individual who represents your interests and make sure that that person in the state government or in the federal government follows your interests and do the things that's necessary. Those are the people who are in the negotiations, the diplomats, okay? But the people who are making sure that that thing happens are everyday people. You are the citizen soldiers. Your vote, and you vote for your particular interests. And if you black folks don't do anything today, then your future and your children's future that are studying in school for whatever interest that's important to us as a people, we understood that back then, but somehow in the last 20 or 30 years, we're losing that. That's why I'm doing this show. Let's go on. Okay, I want to give you a few individuals real quickly before I end this section who individually understood that even before there was a Constitution. This is a sister named Elizabeth Freeman. She took her master to court in 1780. This is years before the 1789 ratification of the Constitution. And she used the system. She understood that. And she had help from her community, collective help. Let's go on. This is another radical. You think there was a Malcolm before Malcolm? Yes, there was this brother named David Walker. In 1828, he wrote this pamphlet, okay, that all black folks must come together. There was a price put on his head called the David Walker Papers in 1828. He was killed in 1830. He died for your right to vote, expressing this point. Let's go on to the next one. This sister, we might know her as, her name is Isabella Bloomley. Her name is, you might also know her as Sojourner Truth, okay? And she took sued her master because he sold her 8-year-old son. There was a law that was passed in New York that said anybody born after 1799 was free. Her son was born in the 1820s, and he was sold. And she took him to court, and she won. And then she became a famous abolitionist and preacher and changed the name to Sojourner Truth in 1846. Our people never stopped, did not say, well, the system doesn't work for me. It definitely wasn't working for her as an enslaved individual, but she still won in court because she understood her rights, regardless of what the piece of paper said. Let's go on real quick. Okay? I'll stop here and then I'll continue on in the next show because we're running out of time on this one. But I just want you to understand that, again, that democracy is not destiny. It is something that we have to fight, like I said earlier. Fight, struggle. As you can see, our folks did not stop fighting from the beginning, regardless of how the system was treating us. And you can see some of the books here, like We Return Fighting, We Will Shoot Back. All these books, and I'll talk about them a little bit more on the next show. So I hope I gave you a little insight that this system, politics is war without bloodshed, but war is politics with bloodshed. They're not different. Let's fight. Don't stop fighting like our ancestors. Until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye.